Welcome to the 5th episode of On the Record, The Whistleblowers. Joangel, Concepcion, and I are very proud and honored to have our 3 guests speak to you about their experiences of being whistleblowers, speaking about areas that they are passionate about and unfortunately suffering consequences for that. We need to change the stigma attached to whistleblowers. They are our heroes. They are the ones that employees need to be hiring. They are the ones that are doing things right.
Hello, I'm Pamela Forward, President and Executive Director of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. And I'm happy to talk to you today about whistleblowing, what it is, how I became involved and survived, and what resources exist to help whistleblowers. Whistleblowing, since the time of the ancient philosophers, is about speaking truth to power, or parrhesia, a Greek word. Since those ancient times, speaking truth has been considered the characteristic of a good citizen and a cornerstone of democracy. Whistleblowing also entails responsibility, which is the obligation to act, and accountability, the obligation to answer for how one has fulfilled those responsibilities. So, what went wrong? And can we fix it? I first became officially active in the whistleblowing world back in 1996 after I watched a documentary by the CBC's Fifth Estate called The Heart of the Matter. A whistleblower from Health Canada, a physician, played an important role by providing information to the CBC after she resigned so she could speak about what she knew. At the time, I was working as a federal public servant. The documentary was the story of how an unsafe heart drug used for angina got on the market in 1981 and how it took 15 years before regulators at Health Canada and elsewhere took notice of the bad news accumulating in studies over that time, starting shortly after the drug got on the market. The studies were warning that the drug was causing harm to many in Canada and around the world, including death. I found it so disturbing that I, along with a number of others, established the first organization to help whistleblowers in Canada, called the Alliance for Public Accountability. Within a few years, we had burnt out as we had received a lot of publicity and there was a lot of demand for assistance from whistleblowers, which we did not have enough resources to deal with. This gave me my first insights into the complexity of whistleblower cases and the devastation that too many whistleblowers experience to their finances, to their health, both mental and physical, to their careers, their relationships, not to mention the accompanying ostracization, the harassment, the bullying, the blacklisting, the gaslighting, etc. And all this for trying to prevent wrongdoing and harm to others. I never forgot this case, and many years later, while studying for a master's degree in legal studies, I did an in-depth investigation into the facts of the same case in an attempt to explain reprisals through the lived experience of a whistleblower in a major case, affecting large numbers of people in important ways. This study and its findings sparked the founding of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society, as we realized the impact of ignoring and maltreating whistleblowers had serious consequences that could no longer be ignored. And in this case, the drug safety issues continue to this day. The findings told us that reprisals were caused by weak, ineffective whistleblower protection legislation. Canada's was recently confirmed the worst in the world. Dysfunctional organizational and political cultures, attitudes and beliefs detrimental to whistleblowers in the courts, and the surprising finding was that legislation alone will not protect whistleblowers. Culture, or how people treat each other, is an equally important factor. Examples of the dysfunction were deceit, conflict of interest, impunity, and self-interest or self-protection over public interest or public protection. And that extended right up to the most senior bureaucratic and political levels. At Whistleblowing Canada, we passionately believe this has to change. To ignore this is to invite and support the growth of corruption, harm to people and the environment, and the undermining of honest democratic governance. I invite you to next listen to Marianne and to Jennifer, whose stories detail the depth of the harm.
I'm Jennifer Fraser. I have a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Toronto. And when I was 13 years old in a public school in Vancouver, Prince of Wales, the grooming began in my science class. At 13 years old, I had no vocabulary for child abuse. I had no understanding that a middle-aged man would be interested in a girl who was so young. And I was essentially sex trafficked into an outdoor education program. There were many, many victims. The teachers, there were 3 involved, were taken to court ultimately in the early 2000s by their middle-aged victims now. And what happened to me was, I guess my innocence or my lack of knowledge, my lack of experience led me to be very resistant. I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that 3 pedophiles were working together and manipulating a whole set of children year after year with, as Pamela says, impunity, with zero intervention. I don't know how many other teachers knew or the principals at that school knew, but the program went on for 10 years and a very large amount of damage was done. I resisted the teachers every step of the way and became a target of humiliation. I was relentlessly shamed in front of my peers for everything, for my appearance, for my body, for my frigidity, for you name it. I was a target, my stupidity. And I stumbled out of the program and away from these teachers, and I went on to university. Cut to 30 years later. I'm a mother, I have a teenage son, and I start to learn from other students and from him that he's the target of humiliation. I had taken my own experience and put it away. It's a very typical psychological response. It's called dissociation. I put it away in a box and I went on with my life to be an academic, to be a teacher, to be a mother, to be a wife. And that part of me, what happened to me, it's almost as if it didn't exist. But when my son was being targeted by 2 teachers, I started getting flashbacks, started getting panic attacks, and it all started coming back. So I did a deep dive into the court case and into what other victims had said, into the charges, into the conviction of one of the teachers, into one teacher who admitted to the court that yes, he had had sex with a teenage girl repeatedly, but he walked away. There was not even any charges in the Canadian system. So I became a whistleblower because I didn't want to become an adult. I didn't want to be a teacher and I didn't want to be a parent that thought that my son should have to endure this kind of humiliation, that teachers had the right to essentially destroy him. And being a whistleblower was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It goes against all of our training to not hurt other people. And you know that when you're a whistleblower, you are going to expose other people to scrutiny, to potential job loss, to suffering. And it's a very difficult thing to do. What I did not understand or realize was going to happen is that the entire system would go 180 degrees and I would be seen as the difficult person. I would be the target of a smear campaign. I would have even the government, the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation, go after me, put me under investigation ultimately. And this was all because I was trying to shine a spotlight on child abuse. I ultimately survived this really difficult and yet meaningful experience for me because I'm an academic. So what I do is I look at the research. So I took my own experience and I put it into the arena with what the research says. And as the world kept trying to tell me, oh, it's the fault of the students that they were abused this way, they're too sensitive, they shouldn't have listened to the teacher's obscenities, that cognitive dissonance for me, because I'd experienced it myself as a kid, and I knew it was soul destroying, and I knew that damage had happened to me. I just was unsure how. So I looked at the psychology, I looked at the psychiatry, I looked at the medicine, and then I looked at the neuroscience. All of these different discourses inform my new book, The Bullied Brain: Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health. Because I believe that kids need to know, teachers need to know, coaches need to know, parents need to know that actually severe damage happens from shaming and humiliation and verbal abuse, along with the other kinds of abuses that children suffer. And the exciting thing is, the inspiring piece is, you can get better. And you need to know you have invisible neurological scars that can be seen on brain scans, and the neuroscientists know evidence-based ways to heal and repair. So I survived by putting that message into my latest book, and I'm really hoping that we use it as a way to turn our society around.
My name is Marianne Knight, and I have spent considerable time and energy over the last 7.5 years seeking justice after being mobbed and bullied for attempting to blow the whistle on fraud involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, provincial tax dollars intended for life-altering therapy for children with autism. Doing the ethical thing, the thing we're supposed to do, resulted in considerable harm for me, including the diagnosis of severe clinical depression and severe clinical anxiety. Over the 10 years I worked for the organization, I eventually became the Director of Information Technology and Communication. The organization experienced tremendous growth, and the budget quadrupled, and we added 10 additional sites. I was not given any raises despite being promoted in title 3 times. And I discovered in 2009 that there was a gap of more than $10,000 between myself and the other directors in the organization. I was denied educational opportunities and 2 promotions. In the 10 years that I worked for the organization, I only had 2 performance reviews, and I was praised for taking leadership roles and represented the agency on numerous regional and provincial task forces and work groups. But I also raised numerous concerns about the fact that I was working 60 and 70 hours a week over the last 5 years of my tenure. I volunteered at all the fundraising events for the organization and served as a volunteer photographer for events for both clients and staff. But I was respectfully critical of the spending of senior management, and my concerns were reinforced when I participated in an audit that was conducted by the Ontario Auditor General of the oversight of the funding ministry with regard to the autism program. There had been numerous investigations into the management of the program since 2004, but subsequently the VP of Human Resources mocked the Auditor General at a leadership forum session. I had a decidedly uneasy relationship with the VP of HR, who denied my request to be paid for time spent working when I was caregiving for my critically ill father. In November of 2013, I was actually threatened that I would be wise not to antagonize senior staff after the VP of HR took an email he was copied on out of context and complained about me to my boss. While I was visibly distraught from this encounter, I met up with the HR manager who reported the incident to the CEO, and I filed a formal complaint of harassment against both my boss and the VP of HR. The CEO said that he had spoken with them and offered me the option of having an external investigation, but I trusted that things would be better, and I said it was not necessary at that time. But over the next year, the VP of HR sabotaged my work and failed to respond to complaints of that I made of harassment that I was being subjected to. And I reported that my health was suffering as a result. So I was encouraged to get in touch with the Employee Assistance Program, which I did. And I was under the care of a psychotherapist because I was experiencing considerable pain in my jaw from clenching my teeth, issues with sleeping, hair loss, and weight loss due to a flare-up of IBS. When I asked how I was to code the time off for counseling, I was instructed to complete an incident report to trigger a filing with WSIB. I also told the CEO that an investigation by an external party was now necessary. My employer failed to file the forms for the WSIB claim and refused to engage an investigator. The first week of December in 2014, my boss announced his retirement, and on the same day he came to see me to advise that I seek a package, as he would not be there to be a buffer between me and senior staff. Over the weekend that followed, I began to experience chest pains, and so I went to see my doctor, who put me on medical leave. But no investigation was instigated, and so I engaged a lawyer and filed for constructive dismissal and cited violations of the Employment Standards and Occupational Health and Safety Act. Counsel for my employer responded that there were no grounds and threatened that if I did not return to work, I would be considered to have resigned my position, which would have meant I forfeited any of my benefits. A request for a discussion of decent working conditions was ignored. On the advice of my MPP, because again, this was a provincially funded organization, and the Ontario Office for the Integrity Commissioner, I filed a formal notice of wrongdoing with the Board of Directors and reported harassment, excessive hours, and the financial wrongdoing. While the board originally indicated they would review all of my concerns, they then only looked at the financial concerns and engaged Deloitte, an accounting firm here in Canada, who, in the words of the adjudicator of the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, and I quote, whitewashed the report. I was not given a copy of the report until July of 2017, 2 years later, during disclosures for my complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. As I obviously could not afford to be considered to have resigned my position, my doctor agreed that I could return to work on an accommodation, working from home and working no more than 40 hours a week. Manulife, the benefits company, denied my claim for short-term disability based on a fraudulent definition. They also declared that I did not qualify for accommodation, despite my own family physician's reports and the legal definition of accommodation in both the Human Rights Code of Ontario and the Human Rights Code of Canada. I was further bullied by the VP of HR, who repeatedly demanded to see my private and personal medical documentation. I was threatened with termination if I did not physically present myself to the workplace, despite having successfully completed all of my responsibilities working from home for 5 weeks. And so I filed human rights complaints against both Manulife and my employer prior to being terminated. I had no choice but to be self-represented, as the human rights process in Ontario does not award legal costs. The Human Rights Legal Support Center refused to represent me and advised that I accept a generous settlement of $15,000 and sign a non-disclosure. 7 lawyers were consulted who all refused to represent me unless I would agree to the settlement and non-disclosure. Mediation at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario also requires signing a non-disclosure, and it is my contention that I was being coerced to settle. My ordeal with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario lasted for more than 4 years and was in itself incredibly damaging to my health. I broke 3 teeth and suffered a supraventricular tachycardia. My heart rate was 182 when I went to the emergency room. Terrifying. The process itself subjected me to additional mobbing and bullying by the CEO, 3 VPs, the HR manager, and the board member, whose witness statements contained numerous lies and slander. The HRTO ruled that in fact there were violations of my human rights, but did nothing in the settlement, in the decision to make me whole. A judicial review was launched in October of 2019, and it is still before the courts, with numerous allegations of procedural unfairness and breach of public trust and illegal reprisal, which are criminal offenses. The OPP initially said they would investigate the allegations of fraud and then said that there were insufficient evidence. Ironically, the fraud was ongoing and documented in the Deloitte report and publicly available audited financial statements. A complaint to the Office of the Independent Police Directorate was dismissed as not being in the public interest. There were 389 autistic children on the wait list when I was fired. And protests at Queen's Park in May of 2016 and in social media are still ongoing. In the summer of 2018, hundreds of staff and board members celebrated the launch of a new logo with a barbecue. And in the fall, hundreds of staff went for dinner and drinks, while the provincial government froze the wait list for autistic children. When asked why I've persevered for so long, it's because it's the right thing to do. This is how I was raised. It's how I've raised my children. But I would not want them to suffer as I have for doing the right thing. No one should suffer for doing the right thing. This is also a promise I made when I became a citizen of Canada.
Well, it's because of stories such as those of Jennifer and Marianne's that Whistleblowing Canada was inspired to open its doors. As an organization, our purpose is to advance education on the whistleblowing phenomenon through research and to share our findings publicly, thus informing public policy dialogue and development. We're also working to find effective ways and resources to support whistleblowers. As Marianne says, no one should suffer for telling the truth and doing the right thing. So our vision is big. We see a Canada where no truth teller is punished for telling the truth, but instead they're respected, they're protected, they're supported, they're valued, and they're rewarded, while wrongdoing is appropriately addressed and wrongdoers are sanctioned. You know, I've often wondered why I got involved in the drug safety case and other whistleblower cases at the time. And I've realized that my history sensitized me to the awful harms that can occur if we don't get this right. I also realized that my experience throughout my career was not that of a born troublemaker, but rather that of an internal whistleblower. It was part of my nature to critically analyze and look for ways of improving, to maintain professional standards, and do no harm, as I was trained in my first profession of nursing. I was inspired by the potential for doing good in the world and shocked to find the workplace was something very different from what the books led us to expect. I witnessed and tried to intervene in situations of abuse and wrongdoing on many occasions during my time in healthcare and other organizations, and more often than not received condemnation and censure for my efforts. And for years, I believed my discomfort in organizations was because there was something wrong with me. How could I explain why I was always on someone's troublemaker list? To understand why, I kept searching and training for different careers or organizations to work for that I would feel comfortable in. What helped me survive was curiosity and the desire to understand why. What was really going on here? That search led me to meet many people who shared my concerns and to understand the problem was not with me alone or just because of dishonest, mean, bad people, but with all of us, including our leaders, in our lack of communication and conflict resolution skills, our lack of awareness about the invisible forces that pressure us in groups to do things contrary to our conscience and what we would never do as autonomous individuals in our own homes. And of course, there's our instinct for survival. So we keep silent and we watch as our colleagues and our friends are brutalized for raising concerns and telling the truth. As modern humans, we can commit to becoming more self-aware and learn skills and ways to resist these unwanted influences so contrary to our values and that have caused so much pain and suffering in the world. We believe education and awareness can cause the change so desperately needed, along with reaching out and finding and working cooperatively with other groups and individuals who get at a deep level that culture change when it comes to whistleblowing is an urgent priority in our country. Resources are few in Canada to help whistleblowers. However, we are so happy to have learned of the work of Linda and Jennifer to increase understanding, and to have heard about Marianne's efforts to improve things for autistic children. All whistleblower stories need to be heard so Canadians can learn about what is really going on and help campaign for change. Together, we can make it happen.
Hi, my name is Joangel Concepcion. I'm the founder of Trael mobile app, but I'm also a toxic workplace bullying survivor. You just heard from whistleblowers about their very own experiences with workplace bullying and harassment. If there's anything we can learn from their stories, it's the importance of documentation. With the Trael app, you can keep track of bullying, harassment, discrimination, racism, or any unwanted behavior in the workplace, all while monitoring your overall wellness. It's a private, secure place to log your thoughts daily, upload supporting images and documents, and keep track of your mental health with custom emojis. You can then export your report and assess your input, or take it to a legal or medical expert for review. If you're experiencing unwanted behavior, please know that you're not alone and that there's help right at your fingertips. Please visit traelapp.com to download the app and begin storing evidence today.
Now you've heard the truth, the human experience of the whistleblower. These stories are heart-wrenching. Many of you will relate. I know I do. Like Jennifer, I watched as two male teachers stood by laughing as they looked down the shirts of young girls in my junior high school. Like Pamela, I wondered, why was it me that kept getting in trouble at work? Like Marianne, there is no way I would stand by and stay silent with such injustice. Women and men who are whistleblowers are standing up to protect you and your loved ones, to do things right. What are we doing? It seems to me that those in power are protecting toxicity. Why? What is on the agenda of these toxic leaders who harass and bully these good people? We must make it stop. If employers want to demonstrate sincerity about creating healthy, ethical climates, the best signal that they can give is to employ a whistleblower. Help those of us who are change makers and whistleblowers and stand with us. You know that there are many of us now. You are not alone, and we have many resources available to you. Contact me, Linda Crockett, at workplaceharassment.ca if you would like more information on these resources.